One thing that is prevalent amongst the very famous artists is their story. Everybody knows about Van Gogh cutting off his ear. Everybody knows the stories about Picasso with his women. James Gill has an incredible story, maybe in some respects equal in incredibility.
Jim's story is unusual from the standpoint that he had such a brilliant beginning.
When he became famous, you know, it's not necessarily whether you're good or not, it's whether you're lucky. So he was both.
The second thing that's rather unusual is that Jim walked away from his career in 1970 when he was really on top of it.
When I learned that Jim was painting again, how could you not be happy? I mean, he's a great painter. And now the rest of us can benefit from his expression.
I believe he's not just an old master. In fact, he's like a very young person. His image making is very, very fresh. It's leaping off into a new direction, and it's mind-boggling.
Anyone who questions whether truth is stranger than fiction need only consider the story of James Gill. Hello, I'm Forrest Sawyer. Those who knew him growing up here in San Angelo, Texas, never imagined that the soft-spoken boy they called Jimmy would, with just a few others, define contemporary art in the 1960s. There was no early indication that Gill possessed the kind of artistic talent that would later create original works featured in Life magazine, or on the cover of Time, or hanging in the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, and the Smithsonian. Gill's paintings and images were quickly embraced by the Hollywood in crowd, as was the artist himself. But life in the fast lane proved too fast. And with his star still rising, Gill once again did the unimaginable. He vanished for more than 30 years. Long thought dead by those in the art world, the return of James Francis Gill has both startled and delighted critics and collectors alike. Even Gill occasionally finds himself marveling at the strange sequence of events that has delivered him to this time and place. Looking back on San Angelo, back when you were growing up, cowboy town, I would think it'd be hard to try to be an artist.
It was. I kept it hidden that I was an artist. Didn't tell people, because if I did tell them that I was really interested in art, they would call me an artiste, which was, I hated that worse than anything. But also, I wasn't really interested in being an artist. I just enjoyed painting and drawing, you know. Didn't want to be an artist, I wanted to be a cowboy.
But you couldn't help yourself.
I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed drawing, always enjoyed drawing. And then learning how to paint. Kind of learned how to when I was a child. I mean, when I was like 6, 7, 8, through there. And so I would just do it.
What did your family say about their little cowboy painting?
My mom was always encouraging, you know, for art.
And of course, back then, you know, nobody had any money. And nobody took lessons for anything, you just learned.
When Jim was a kid, I don't believe anyone had any inkling that he had artistic ability. We did know, we were peripherally aware that he did some painting.
Not being an artist myself, I didn't see the artistic value of Jimmy back then.
Heck, I had done some painting when I was a little kid, you know, and my mother was an artist and she furnished me the materials and I tried my hand at it, but I was no more impressed with his stuff than with my own.
We kind of made fun of the guys that played in the band, and if you didn't come out for football or you didn't ride bulls or horses or something like that, well, kind of looked down on those people. So maybe he was afraid to show us his artistic talent. I don't know.
In high school, me and some more guys organized a rodeo club. And from that, we would go to, then we'd go to high school rodeos. And, you know, eventually I did some professional rodeoing.
Were you any good?
No.
Why not?
Well, you know, I really wanted to be, but I just wasn't. I wasn't a good bronc rider or a bull rider.
At 17, a fistfight over a girl resulted in a judge's tough offer: go to jail or join the military.
I had to go in the Marines.
You got slapped into the Marines.
Right, yeah. Well, that used to be kind of a standard thing, what happened to me.
Now, the irony of that is that you might not have had the artistic career that you had if you hadn't been forced into the Marines.
There was about 3,000 of us standing up, getting a welcome to the base speech, and the colonel says, and if anyone doesn't like what he's been assigned to, speak up now, forever hold your peace. So I said, I do not want to be a refrigeration repair specialist. He said, what do you want to be? And I said, well, I'm an artist. I would like to do something like that.
Gill's decision to speak up led to an assignment as an architectural draftsman. After completing his service, Gill moved to Odessa, where he took a job at an architectural firm. There he worked with a veteran architect who, having seen some of Gill's paintings, warned his young protege that he'd find no artistic freedom in architecture.
And he told me, he said, just go to your painting. He said, you're never going to be satisfied with architecture. He said, you can, do some creative things, but he said, get into your painting.
He did go to the University of Texas to study early on. Even at the university, he was a loner. He wasn't doing things necessarily to please his professors. He was doing them his own way, which necessarily didn't please his professors. So he has this strong, independent nature about him.
Gill's time at the university was productive, and near the end, he began working on a trio of paintings that would soon change the 26-year-old art student's life forever. Now, there's a series of paintings that were really important to you, right? Women in cars.
What happened at that time was Jackie Kennedy and a lot of the stars were wearing sunglasses. The magazines and the newspapers would get a shot of them stepping out of their car. They'd lean down, they'd have on their sunglasses, and I could never see their eyes. And that was always kind of amazing to me. So I did a series of 3 of them that later on I took to LA, and they were kind of the catalyst to me really moving on in the art world.
James Gill's trip to the West Coast was completely serendipitous. He was hitching a ride to New York with a friend who had to first go to Los Angeles. Gill decided to bring his Women in Cars paintings with him. Once he hit town, Gill wandered into LA's premier art gallery, the Felix Landau Gallery.
I just walked in with these paintings to show to the gallery. And I set them up on the wall, and there happened to be a show going there of painters that I really liked. And so I was over looking at paintings, and Felix Landau kind of came out of the audience and said, whose paintings are these? And I thought, oh, I've blown it, I shouldn't have my paintings in there. And I said, mine, and he said, well, I'd like to talk to you. Went into the office, and he said, I like your paintings. Tell me about yourself.
Felix Landau then did something extraordinary. He offered to set Gill up in a studio to paint for a month, and if he liked what he saw, he would agree to represent him.
He says, Mother says, he'll rent me an apartment and furnish the paints and everything if I'll just stay out here and paint for his gallery. So I said, well, that sounds like a good deal. I said, do you want to do it? And he said, yeah. I said, I'd like to do it. And I said, well, why don't you just stay and do it? I said, you can always come home if you don't like it.
So during that month was when a magazine came out about 2 weeks after Marilyn Monroe had died, with a bunch of photographs of her. I did this triptych of Marilyn Monroe with like 9 images behind the 3 images of her, like black and white photographs. And so he called me up at the end of the month and said, okay, I'll come out and see what you got. And he saw those Marilyns, and he said, fantastic. He got them, put them in his car, went home, made a reservation, flew to New York. That was in October. I had a show in November and December in New York. Museum of Modern Art bought them. And January of '63, Life magazine reproduced them.
Now, in the art world, this is unheard of, especially from a major gallery. I mean, it just almost never happens. And it was the only time that Felix Landau ever did that, that an artist walked in off the street, unannounced, with no idea who this person was, and Felix immediately took him on. A month later, he signed him up for the gallery, immediately started dealing his work.
So I went from a country bumpkin to kind of a lot of fame and movie stars and everything within 2 months.
Encouraged by his overnight success, James Gill decided to stay in Los Angeles. He set up an art studio on Santa Monica Boulevard across the street from the New Art movie theater, and there he worked prolifically. He was gripped by experimentation, and with it a certain intensity was growing. Each work Gill produced was a bold new statement, and the art world was taking notice, as evidenced by his inclusion in the Sao Paulo 9 exhibition in Brazil, one of the most prestigious international exhibitions of the day.
Now, the Sao Paulo and the exhibit, I'm just looking at some of the names that were there. You got James Gill, Robert Indiana, Jasper Johns, Roy Lichtenstein, Claes Oldenburg, Robert Rauschenberg, James Rosenquist, Ed Ruscha, and Andy Warhol, all in one exhibition.
Right.
That's astonishing.
Right. And that was before everyone's fame took off. That was kind of a major show, anyway.
Did you know that then?
Yeah, kind of. I was really, really proud that I'd been chosen for that, because there was the top 20 artists of the United States, and I was one of them.
On May 17, 2007, Christie's held a special auction featuring works by several pop icons from the Sao Paulo 9 exhibition. Many pieces fetched $1 million or more. In a separate auction, Andy Warhol set a new record when his painting of a car crash sold for an astounding $72 million. In addition, one of Warhol's Marilyn Monroe portraits sold for an impressive $28 million.
I think James Gill's Marilyn is every bit as good and exciting a painting as Warhol's Marilyn, and I don't see any reason why, if he got into that same auction, why he wouldn't bring millions for his paintings.
One of the first things that just jumps out at me are the Marilyn images. The style is so similar to some of the things that Warhol did. It appears that you work in parallel tracks, but did yours precede Warhol?
Well, probably about the same time, because I was having a show. My show of Marilyn was in November and December in New York. He was having a show at the same time, his first one-man show, and supposedly he had a couple of Marilyns. I didn't see his, but when I met him later, he said that he had seen my show. But Warhol certainly is not a copycat, or I wasn't, you know, we were just, that's what happened then, you know, and he did things completely different from me.
Marilyn Monroe's image was very popular right at the time of her. It was popular before she committed suicide, but it was very popular at the time. Jim Gill jumped on it right away. I mean, he really did that painting just at the time, and Warhol followed a little bit later, but by using a stock image of Marilyn that was really a photo shoot headshot, rather than a more candid photograph, which was what Jim used as source material. I think the reason that the Warhol is much more famous is because he sort of repeated that image. Jim had a more personal relationship, I think, to that tragedy, and it came out the way he presented his painting.
Does it trouble you that he becomes identified with Marilyn when that was so important to your career?
Well, you know, Andy kind of left everyone in the dust. But I was with a really good gallery, still selling paintings, you know, and I was selling a lot of paintings to movie stars and writers. I mean, a lot of the screenplay writers, the directors. So I had a whole market there.
James Gill's work resonated with the Hollywood creative community. Gill fondly remembers the day he was invited to John Wayne's house.
So I walk in, he said, "Hey, Gill, come down here," you know? And he said, "How you doing?" He said, "Have you had breakfast?" I said, "Yeah, I hadn't had breakfast." I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he said, "Well, then join me. You want the same thing I've got?" I said, "Sure." So he got about a 12-inch tumbler, filled it up with bourbon. And so I kept up with Duke all day long, you know, filling up those glasses. I was an outsider. I was an artist, so I wasn't, as in no way competition or part of the industry. So I had lots of buddies, you know. Tony Curtis, I mean, we buddied around for quite a while, you know. And Tony would have a caravan of limousines, and he'd come by and pick me up, you know, and we'd go to the factory where all the movie stars hang out. I was kind of having 15 minutes of fame then, so kind of popular, a little bit of fame.
Did the ladies like you, Jim?
Yes, you know, it was a pretty wild time in the early 60s, you know.
You want to talk about that?
Well, I probably shouldn't talk too much about it, but you know, there was a lot of romantic encounters.
I found Jim to be a person without judgment, where a lot of artists in that time were so into how they were being perceived by other people. Jim was his own man. He really didn't care how other people perceived him. He just lived in the moment. I think we all try to achieve being here now, and it's written about and sung about, and Jim was in the now and without judgment, and that's one of the things I loved about him.
I think he has a true love of women and of beauty. Not unusual, but what he's done with it in terms of his own art, the early paintings of the nudes, the women on the couches, is a certain acknowledgement of beauty, of female beauty, and he's very attracted to that. So the paintings are sexy. They're even bordering on erotic in a way that's very honoring of women's beauty.
The other subject that was very big for you has continued to be is women, right?
Well, what? I mean, a beautiful woman, there's just nothing like it. You know, I mean, lips, I love lips, you know. Hair, I mean, the whole image. You know, I've been fortunate. I've had a number of beautiful wives. I have the most beautiful wife right now. I have a delightful...
A number of beautiful wives?
Yeah.
How many?
Well, I've been married 6 times. You know.
You decided to keep at it till you got it right?
Keep at it till I got it right. Finally got it right.
When I saw his art, before I ever met him face to face, I knew this was somebody that I wanted to get to know. His art was just so amazing. He's truly a gentleman in the truest sense of the word. He's a gentle man.
As the war in Vietnam escalated, many of James Gill's paintings began to reflect his own anti-war sentiments.
Jim Gill certainly captured that period of time through the paintings of the generals and the political people. I mean, this wasn't the typical subject that artists were drawn to. I mean, they were drawn to other things, and he was one of the few that were really rendering these images and painting. There were many photographers, of course, and filmmakers that were dealing with this, but to take it on as a subject for painting was rather unique.
I did a painting called The Machines, and it had a kind of a Lyndon Johnson type figure with a bunch of microphones. All of the lines from the microphones, they kind of went down to these images, these Vietnamese war images of people burning up, getting shot, dying. And the idea behind it was that the newspapers and the television was keeping the war going. This painting was bought by Otis Chandler, and it hung in his conference room for years. I don't know whether he ever got the point of the painting or not, but I thought how ironic that this painting of the machines hung behind Otis Chandler, the publisher of the LA Times.
Interest in Gill's paintings dealing with cultural figures and political issues began to widen.
And so he was quickly sought after by other museums, curators in the country, from the Chicago Art Institute, from the Whitney Museum. Other places were starting to pay attention, and when their acquisition budgets could afford to do so, they would contact Felix Landau. We want a Jim Gill in our collection. And once you're knighted by